really delighted to introduce our speakers today. Performance legend, playwright and actress Penny Arcade. She performed in the John Bacara's seminal Playhouse of the Ridiculous and Andy Warhol's Factory. Her most famous show, Bitch, Dyke, Bag, Hag, Hall, was originally created as a brilliant and theatre's retort to censorship in the arts, and went on to become one of the most exuberant events ever to emerge from New York's downtown art scene. It also played at the ICA Theatre in 1993, so it's fantastic to welcome you back today. And it's now celebrating its 20th anniversary and will be playing at the Arcana tent from the 27th of June to the 22nd of July, so you must go. Penny will be in conversation with Mark Shenton, London-based theatre critic, writes for the Sunday Express and The Stage, and is chairman of the drama section of the Critics Circle, with a particular passion and interest for Broadway, musicals and gay-themed work. So Penny and Mark will have a conversation and then we'll open up for some questions from you. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you to our speakers, and I'll hand over to Mark.
Hello everyone. Hello Penny.
Hey.
It's been nearly 20 years since I first saw that Bitch, Dyke, Bag, Hag, Hall at Edinburgh. Saw it several times there and then saw it again here at the ICA, so I am a long-term fan.
Thank you.
Where did 20 years go to? That's what I don't understand. That's,
you know, there is a belief in the world, in some quarters of the world, that the future moves to the past as opposed to the past moving to the future.
Right.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Bitch, Dyke, Bag, Hag, Hall, where did that come from as a show?
Well, the truth of it is, that was 1990. I started making my own work, and around 1985 was really when I started. I mean, in 81 I started doing writing my own parts, creating my own parts in other people's shows is what would happen. And so around 1986 to 87, I had already taken the first show I developed, which was all improvisational, and rented a theater on Avenue A, and ran it 4 nights a week, basically drawing the line between myself and the downtown art administrators. Because at that time, as happens every 10 or 12 years, the press starts talking about the shrinking audience, that there's a shrinking audience for theater. And of course I proved that there wasn't, because at that time in 1985, a downtown performance person could expect, if you were considered really wildly successful, to get 4 performances, like a Thursday through Sunday. And I was doing improvisational work, which was really improvisational, meaning I go on stage with an idea.
And not a script, obviously.
Not a script, no script. And Mark Russell, who ran Performance Space at 122 at the time, wouldn't let me do the same show again. And I wasn't like other people, just lie and change the title. So at any rate, I did this. And at the time, 4 shows a week, sellout crowds, it was 100 people, 4 times a week. But I couldn't get reviewed. And I really believed at that time, and I said, this is as good as I get, because of course everybody who's in their mid-30s thinks that they're old now and
it's not going to get any better.
Not going to get any better. And I didn't get reviewed.
But very difficult to review a show, as a critic, it's very difficult to review a show that changes every night, because you're not reviewing
But no, that's not true, because it's changing in. If it's real improvisational work, it's not changing out, it's changing to become more itself.
Right.
So anyways, what happened was, in 1990, I called Mark Russell, and I said, I'd like a booking. I've got some ideas. And he said, oh, Penny, I'm sorry, we're booked for the next 2 years. And I was pissed off, so I said, too bad, my show's called Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore. Total improv. I don't know where it came from, and Mark said, really? Don't give it to anyone else.
So the title led the show.
Yes, and Jack Smith said, the great Jack Smith said, the title is 90% of the work.
Yeah, which is why artists, playwrights always agonize over their titles, don't they? Yeah. It's very interesting that this very week, Harvey Firestein's Torch Song Trilogy returned to London, which was born around the same time. It was premiered on Broadway in 1982, but it had gone through various incarnations to get there. It's 3 plays bolted together to make a trilogy. And that began via La Mama in New York.
Well, it's so interesting, though, because it is so much earlier than me.
Yeah.
Because Harvey, was a member and very involved in the downtown art scene around La Mama, mainly as an actor.
Yeah.
And he kind of was my first indication of an actor who became a writer and wrote out of form.
Yes.
Because Torch Song wasn't really considered a play.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite experimental in some of its
Yes.
structures. I mean, first act a monologue, the second act is a sort of weaving of different things, and then the third act's actually a play.
Yeah.
But actually, I interviewed him a few weeks ago on the phone, and he said he was talking very much like your experience about the title is all. It became a trilogy again, sheer by sheer accident, because in order to get a booking at La Mama, he had to tell Ellen Stewart that he had a trilogy in him, and that was to make sure that he could book the room.
Absolutely.
That had to have the booking before he had the play.
Yeah, Ellen was so depraved. I mean, she really didn't know anything about theater at all, and didn't want to know anything, but you had to kind of seduce her in some kind of a way.
Yeah. But you didn't know much about theatre either going in. I mean, you came from, you haven't had a formal theatre training at all.
I haven't had any training.
Right.
I came directly from Borstal,
Yeah.
where I wrote my first play,
You're right.
which is a very funny story because the day that I arrived, working class immigrant, peasant, Italian, first person in my family I thought could do anything bad in 3,000 years. And I was very ashamed and very, my mother brought me with my godmother. It was like, this was like just a horror, right? And I came at dinner time, and so they had all these 4 groups of girls, like 30 girls in each group. And there was a nun with a crucifix and a desk. And she kept ringing this little bell saying, "Silence, silence." And I didn't know she was talking to me. So I was like prattling on. And then she called group by group to get their food, and you got your milk and your silverware. And then you walked by her desk, and the girl in front of me was ahead of me, and I saw that on the desk were 3 completely ripped open packages of cigarettes.
Yeah.
Completely ripped open package of Cools, Marlboros, Winston. And the girl ahead of me leaned forward. She picked up a cigarette and put it on her tray. Couldn't believe it. So I stepped forward and I leaned forward and I picked up a cigarette, and the nun rang the bell and she went, "Deprived for speaking during silence." And I said, "Fuck you." And she went, "Ding, deprived for the next cigarette." And I said, "I don't give a fucking goddamn fuck." And she went, "Ding, ding, ding, deprived for the next week." And I said, "Go fuck yourself or something." She went, "Ding, ding, ding, deprived for the next 2 weeks." And I stopped, because I thought I might want a cigarette in 2 weeks. And then the next morning, I received a note to go down to the office of one Mother Mark, who was in charge of all the entertainment. And Mother Mark was probably 26 years old. And I talk about her in Bitch Dyke Faghead, of course. She's a big figure in my life. And Mother Mark said, "Listen, I caught your act in the dining room last night with Mother Mary Alice. And you're funny. You've got timing. You're hot. I want you to write me a play." And I was like, "I can't write a play." And she said, "Of course you can." And that was the first time I wrote a play, was in Borstal. So then, yes, no education. Came out, went home to my family, lasted there about 2 months. You can only either die or become a nun if you've done anything bad in a Southern Italian family. And then I went, ended up going with the Carlotta Queens to Provincetown and then to New York. And then within 7 months of being on the street in New York, where I met Jack Smith and met all kinds of other figures on the street of the East Village, I was brought to John Vaccaro.
Right. And the East Village, of course, became your home. I mean, has become your home.
Yes, it has. Except I'm doing the opposite of Quentin Crisp. I'm going to come to London the way Quentin Crisp went to America.
Indeed.
Yes, because Britain is the only place where you can eke out the imposture that you're still living in the 20th century. Because I have no interest in living in the 21st century at all.
Exactly. And of course, Quentin became a long-term friend of yours as well, didn't
Yes,
he? I
he
mean,
did.
he's not just an inspiration from that point of view. He's actually
He was a
very-
mentor. He was probably the only mentor I've really ever had, because as I've grown older, I've learned that the mentor chooses the mentee, not the other way around.
Right.
And no one ever really chose me, you see. I just hung around and picked up scraps
Yeah.
that other people weren't interested in. But Quentin actually recognized something in me that was similar to him.
As of course did that nun right early on.
Mother Mark, yeah.
Mother Mark, she had recognised something in
Yeah.
you. So, you know, where she got that from that you have this in you.
I think it's the magnetic stage presence and the completely 100% commitment to whatever I'm doing in that moment. I think it's even hard for me to think about, like, because but then you see that's part of it, because I was so ashamed.
Right.
I was so ashamed, so then I had to just go be that all the way.
So theatre sort of provided a route to redemption of a kind.
Absolutely, without question. But the thing that's funny was that ever since I was like 4 or 5 years old, I wanted to do theater.
Right.
I didn't know that there was such a thing as theater. Just like dance, I started with dance. I thought I invented it. See, I didn't know.
Just as Quentin Crisp invented homosexuality.
Yes, exactly.
Much the same way.
Well, he codified it, as he said. But the point being with me is that because I was from this very, very peasant background on my mother's side, quite different on my father's side, because he was quite middle class. His father was his father was the captain of the port of Savona, and I'll just briefly say he was put in a mental hospital when I was 4 years old, and I never saw him again. But when I was 53, as is part of my deal with the universe,
Yeah.
my mother's house had to be sold. She died, and we were clearing it out. Nobody else, my brothers and sisters, weren't interested in any of this old stuff. I thought everything had to be saved. And we were in the room that I was conceived in, and I know everything in this house because I lived my life as an anthropologist, trying to figure out the real story behind everything. And at one point, my then husband, Chris Rail, was handing things out of a closet. He handed out a small painting this big that was like 5 o'clock in the morning on the morning of the crucifixion. Like, you know, it was pen and ink, very dark, very bleak. Christ on the cross, John the Beloved, Mary Magdalene, depressed at the foot of the cross. And I looked at it and I thought, what am I going to do with this? And I'd never seen it before, which was unusual. And I went to put it on a pile that was this high of other things. And on the back, I saw writing. And it was my father's handwriting, which I recognized because my father wrote. Everything I know about my father pretty much comes from what he wrote in the back of photos. And it was a letter to me.
And you just found by sheer accident.
I found it in 2003 when I had just turned 53. It was written in 1953 when I was 3. And in it he said, Dear Susanna, my real name is Susanna, I am writing this to you with all the love of a poor father for his children. You are everything that I know of what is great and beautiful and sublime in the world. And as I translated this to Chris,
It was in Italian.
in Italian,
Yeah.
Chris turned to me and he said, well, now we know where you get your writing talent from. Your mother would never even know the word sublime. So there you have it. I don't know what that was an answer to, but
Yeah, no, it's quite a journey, hasn't it? I mean, a father you didn't know and growing up, first generation, obviously, of an immigrant family in America. You said you didn't know, had discovered theatre. You didn't know what theatre was,
Right.
but theatre was something that was instinctive.
But my mother was obsessed with Shirley Temple. And I actually have video of my mother, because I collect all proof. I took care of my mother when she was dying. And at one point, apropos of nothing, my mother's in the rocking chair. Hey! What do you think? Shirley Temple saved the movie industry. 4 years old. 4 years old. The tickets were 5 cents. Nobody wanted to go. But Shirley Temple, 4 years old, she saved the movie business. And I said, gee, Mom, you know, I do theater. I Shirley Temple when I was little? And my mother went like this. You, like Shirley Temple, don't make me laugh. And at the time I thought, wow, this is hard to take at 51. At 5, it must have been really hard. So I think that, it must have come because of wanting her approval. And actually in La Miseria, which is in the book, the girl who came to play the young me she was a 13-year-old girl at the time, and she didn't have a monologue to audition with. So I wrote her a monologue on the spot, which ended up in the play, which is about, I love to watch Mommy watch Shirley Temple. I didn't know Mommy could love somebody that much. So I think I always wanted to do theater, I always wanted to perform, and I lived in a world of make-believe, and I was very interested from a young age of recreating comic strips. I would come home from school and try to get my next door neighbor to play the Jackson twins, sort of things. Yeah.
I mean, a large part of your work is autobiographical, obviously. Hence, you just said about the mother and the Shirley Temple monologue. Yeah. So it always comes from experience.
I think some of us, I had this conversation with Eileen Miles, a very famous lesbian poet, some people may know. Eileen said to me, how do people who aren't artists mediate through their lives? Because it's a way of cataloging and not just, but also making sense of it. I mean, especially if you have something that's why I didn't originally start out doing autobiographical work. My original work for the first 5 years of my work was biographical, where I became other people that I knew that other people knew.
Yeah.
So one of the elements with me has always been about ability. I've always wanted to develop my ability, and I've always wanted to present my ability. So for that reason, I did people that I knew, like the famous Margot Howard, the famous drag queen, while Margot was alive. And people could measure, it's called a standard, where you can measure. I would do Andrea Whips, I would do people that people knew.
And what about Margot? Did she come and measure you?
Margot adored it. Margot would say, Benny Arcade does a better Margot Howard than I. Better than I. Penny Arcade is born on the same day as me, although she is a few decades older.
And the talent for mimicry, that's something, again, was that instinctive? Was that something?
Yes, but it's very specific. I can only do that when I'm compelled.
Right.
And I think it has something to do in some ways from, I've tried to sort out my mental illness from my artwork.
Yeah.
Not everyone does, and I think that's from, in a way, being that displaced person, because I was a displaced child of displaced people.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand. Do you understand?
Right, yeah.
They didn't understand what they were, or where they were from, or anything, or how they fit into the society. And one of the things that I love about my collaborator, Steve, in his essay about me, he said something that enlightened me, which was, he said, Penny Arcade owned or held an American imagination.
Right. It's all about being the outsider, isn't it?
Yes.
And then from the outsider becoming you're becoming yourself. I mean,
yes. And that's what used to happen in the gay world.
I know it's a bland line in Le Cage aux Folles that Harvey wrote the book for, but the I am what I am my own special creation.
Absolutely.
It's
to me, it's not banal at all.
Yeah.
To me, that all the things that young queer people find banal, they can go fuck themselves because there's a cost there.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that before you were presented with either you were going to pay the cost of being who you were, or you weren't willing to, and it depended to what pressure, internal pressure, that was for you.
Yeah.
you know? I mean, we all go through the same thing. Nobody likes me, nobody likes me, nobody likes me, I'm not any good, I'm not any good, I'm not any good. I'm special.
Yeah.
Because that's the flip side of it, isn't it?
Yeah. It's confronting the contradictions of life. I mean, that's...
But one of the things I was thinking that came up in my mind when you're talking about Quentin, like what I came to understand about Quentin, that was very, very salient for me, was that Quentin, because of his stubbornness and his commitment to the truth about himself, which he did have, that left him to a very narrow society that wasn't anywhere as smart as he was, you know, and he deeply, deeply, deeply regretted this. And years later, for myself, really just in the past 10 years, I recognized that my commitment to the East Village, to the downtown queer theater scene, to all of that, was completely misplaced. Because the people who started out with me in the 60s, who most of them stopped performing by the time they were 27 or 28, deeply resent me, because they think I'm wildly famous. They think I'm like, they think I'm famous like Tilda Swinton or something. You know what I mean? And then the world changed because of AIDS.
Yeah.
My audience that would have swept me into extremely mainstream fame died.
Many of them died, yeah.
Most of them died. And I then I was so busy, working, honing my own little 40 acres that I didn't act in other people's plays.
Yeah.
And I'm a very good actress. People wanted me to go to Hollywood repeatedly, and I wouldn't do it. I was holding on to some kind of 1960s, idealism, and then I found out that Hollywood is so much less corrupt than the art world. Because the art world is elitist, and...
But I mean, Harvey Fierstein, again, to mention him, you said you got boxed into your little corner there, but he did actually make that leap from downtown performer to, now he's a Broadway star.
Yes, he
he appears in Broadway musicals, he appears,
Yep.
so he's done that journey.
Yes,
And
he's a man.
he's a man, yes.
As my friend Fran Leibowitz says, you cannot teach testosterone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the other thing you just mentioned there, you just touched on, is the difference between theatre and the art world. I mean, that's the other thing that's distinctive about your career, is that it straddles the worlds of theatre and performance art and art. It breaks down all those barriers.
Yes.
It's not in a little category
Well,
of its own.
that's for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, because I grew up in the Playhouse of the Ridiculous, and I am nothing if not the dutiful daughter of New York's criminal, homosexual, psychedelic, intellectual avant-garde, which includes Robert Patrick, Harry Koutoukis, Charles Ludlam, beside Vaccaro and all these other people that I was involved with, Warhol, etc. So Harry Koutoukis, who died 3 years ago, used to call me the little sister of the avant-garde because, I just straddled that period, So when I came into my own in my 30s, I didn't want to do the same thing. I didn't want to do camp theater. I wasn't interested really in what Charles Ludlam did. I was never really interested in camp theater because it wasn't dangerous enough. It wasn't risky enough. And was I thinking, oh, it's not risky enough? No, I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking that there were things that, the Playhouse of the Ridiculous broke down the fourth wall. And then I thought, well, then I shall break down the other three. What's there for me to do? And then I realized very quickly that my relationship was with the audience, that the audience understood my work. The audience never had a problem in understanding my work the way certain critics did.
Yeah.
The audience supported the work, and very early on, in that first run that I did of 4.5 months, and I said to the audience, if you need to see a big article about me in the New York Times, stop coming. But if you think this work is good, I need you to replace yourself in the audience. So I gave them a mantle of responsibility to the audience.
Word of mouth.
I just told them, you have to replace yourself, because, and I think that what the audience has always understood is that I'm not all that about myself. I don't think being an artist is special. I don't think I'm special any more than I think anybody's special. Do you know what I mean? So the audience took it on because I was and always have been the underdog, right?
One of the great phrases you use in the book is, in the interview is about it being your show being a drag you show.
A drag factor.
And we're not talking about drag queens, we're talking about the fact that people
drag people
to see it.
The first indication of this was when we did Bitch Dyke Fag Hag Word for a year. It ran off Broadway, which is totally unheard of, completely unheard of a performance art show, going off Broadway. And when the show was running about 5 or 6 months, the humorist Fran Lebowitz came. And if you don't know Fran Lebowitz, you must download Public Speaking. It's Scorsese's profile on Fran Lebowitz. And I always say Fran Lebowitz is the male Penny Arcade. She's very, very funny. Fran came to the show and Fran said, the writing is brilliant and there are real people here. Where do they come from? And what I've learned, because as a self-producing person, I learned over the years that if the New York Times writes about you, you get a New York Times audience.
Yeah.
If the Village Voice writes about you, you get a Village Voice audience. If Time Out writes about you, you get a Time Out audience. But if real people come to the show and they feel that this show represents stuff that they're in line with, they will tell all their friends. Well, all of us have all different kinds of friends, right? I have friends who read the Times, who read the Voice, who read Time Out, So you end up with a kind of audience that isn't this cookie-cutter audience.
So you were a Facebook show before Facebook?
Yes, I was. Absolutely.
Ahead of the curve.
But we loved it, and also because, as I told you at lunch, one day I just said to the audience, did somebody drag you here? And it was because I hadn't been reviewed. It was somewhere where I hadn't been reviewed, and I said to the audience, oh, they're not reviewing me. Did somebody drag you here? And the audience exploded all over the room. People were laughing, and I was thinking, oh, so it's true then,
They recognized it.
They dragged their friends, yeah.
But you also said to me, when you first said to me, there must be some critics who like the theatre, when you met me. Well, there are, I would say, first of all, but secondly, you don't obviously have too high an opinion of critics.
Well, I throw my lot in with Oscar Wilde, who said, every review is an autobiography. The problem is that the theater is elitist.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people, there's a lot of people who haven't seen my work. Ben Brantley has never seen my work.
Ben's in London at the moment for 3 weeks, and I shall tell him to come and see you.
Well, you should come and see me. But, and he may have seen my work and I don't know it, but here's the point that I want to make about this.
He was at Torch on Trilogy the other night, sitting on the across the aisle from me.
The thing is that people develop an idea. I'll tell you something. John Ware.
Yeah.
I met John Ware 25 years ago, totally accidentally. He's a great playwright. And he had said to me 25 years ago, he says, what do you do? I said, performance art. And he said, what's that? Looking down his nose at me. And I said, I kind of examine, I said, I do what I want. I do what I want. And he, wasn't that interested. 5 years ago, I was presenting at the Innovative Theater Awards, and this man walked up to me. And he said, you're Penny Arcade. And I said, and you are John Ware. And he said, yes, I am. He said, I remember meeting you. I said, so do I. I remember what you said. He said, really? And what was that? I said, you said, and what do you do? And I said, performance art. And you said, what's that? And he said, that's right. And I said, and now people are getting PhDs in it.
Yeah.
And he started laughing. And I was presenting, and I had to go on stage. Charles Bush was introducing. And I saw John Ware running. And I thought, oh, he's going to go and watch me from the audience. So they told me I could only say 2 minutes. They gave me 2 minutes. So I distilled my show, New York Values, which is a 2.5-hour show, into 2 minutes, right? Well, 2.5 minutes. And I went out there, and I'm waiting to go on, and Charles Bush is there with Julie Halston, his muse, and they're talking, and he starts and he says, and the next person that I'm going to present is a very famous, legendary downtown blah, 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 who I'm very afraid of. And Julie Halston goes, oh yes, me too, I've always been very afraid of her. And then he goes on, yes, she's very, very, very dangerous. And I'm standing in the back, what the fuck are they talking about? Because they don't know me. They don't know me, you know? And it went on and on and on, and finally it said Penny Arcade. And the curtain opened, and I just stood there like this for a minute, or 10 seconds, you know, to give the thing. And then I walked forward, and I did my 2.5-minute version, and the audience went nuts. They loved it. Afterwards, I go up the stage, in comes John Guare, running over me. He said, oh my God, he said, I can't believe, he said, you're so brilliant, you're so funny, you're so insightful. He said, I can't believe what you just did like that in 2 minutes. And I said, you should come and see one of my shows. But I think the combination of being intellectually confident, because I am, and being emotionally not confident, I'm never going to be confident because I didn't get that as a child.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that, and people...
That damage is there forever, isn't it?
It's there forever, and people, most people, 99% of people, dislike and are turned off by modesty. And I am naturally very modest. Look, if I couldn't get my mother to be excited about me having a page in Vogue magazine, you know, it's going to be really hard for me to have that much of a narcissistic ego. I'm never going to have that.
Yeah.
But people don't, they don't, you know, they...
And yet the art of performing is an act of narcissism in itself, isn't it? Or can be.
It can be. I think Bruce Benderson, who I was telling you about, is one of our greatest writers, and you should all read him, the Romanian. Amazing. He got the Prix de Fleur, the highest French literature prize, you know, for this novel about his year relationship with a Romanian hustler. And I tell young gay writers, he didn't get the biggest gay writing prize, okay? He got like the greatest literature prize. He came to see Bitch Dyke Fag Gore when I did it for one night in New York 3 years ago. And he wrote me afterwards and he said, Penny, he said, I don't know how you manage it. He said, but you make me care. He said, you have obviously inverted your narcissism. And I think that's true, because when I perform, I'm holding a standard. I have a very, very high standard of what acting is to me. And it's so funny because they bring me into NYU. I go and I teach in all these fucking schools, right? I've never had a career in the real acting world. Although I imagine I should start to have it now because that's what they do with downtown artists when they get to be in their 60s. But I know so much about it. I know so much about casting. I know so much about auditioning. I know so much about acting because I've worked it out in a laboratory in myself, fueled by my tremendous curiosity and my very, very great intelligence. And I can say that because I earned that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't think of like the fact that I happen to be so smart as like, you know, I don't know, like an ego-y thing. I just think of it as someone who can like cut wood really well. You know, like some people can do some things really well. I can think really, really well.
Yeah.
You know.
And translate that into ideas and theatre.
Because I have a desperate need to communicate.
Yeah, yeah. The actor Simon Russell Beale is one of our best English actors. I heard him interviewed and he said that many actors suffer from a monumental ego and a crippling lack of self-esteem.
Yes.
So it's the tension between those two things.
It is. And it just depends. I think what we consider a great actor is someone who can rein those two things and put that ego and that crippling self-esteem to work.
Yeah.
You see? It's a question of putting it to work because it is work. And entering, I think, you know, also the other thing with actors, I think most of us are just tremendously shy. And nobody, of course, ever believes that when I say I'm tremendously shy, but I'm not in charge of when I'm shy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think that there's also that incredible desire to escape into somebody else, and to escape into language. If you love language.
But of course you're in charge of yourself when you're on stage, you're in charge of the audience.
I manage myself when I'm on stage.
Yes.
And even people who don't really like me, of which there are many, because, and I finally figured this out as well, for two reasons. One is people want my approval, which I have never understood. And even when I was a street junkie on the street as a 17-year-old, people wanted my approval. I never understood why. Partially that, and then the other part of it is, I've already forgotten what I was saying. Hello, everybody. ADD. Uh-oh, let me go back. What am I saying? Somebody's yelling.
Shyness.
Huh?
Shyness.
Shyness, okay.
Why people don't
No, why people don't like you.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. Because people, if people feel supported by my values,
Yes.
then they love me and I'm a beacon of light for them. If they feel critiqued by my values, then they hate me. And the other part of it is something I learned this past year studying contemporary neuroscience, is that human beings perceive a threat to their status in the same way as they perceive it, someone having a knife to their throat.
Yeah.
So when I would say to Mark Russell at Performance Space 122 in 1986, when he wouldn't book me in the big benefit with 60 other people, and Karen Finley had told me that he said I was in the benefit, so I called him, I was so excited. Inclusion, ooh, I want to be included. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, Penny, we decided against having you. I said, you decided against having me? You have 60 fucking people in this thing? And he said, well, you know, Penny, we've worked with you before. And I said, Mark, I hope you're saying a novena to St. Jude that I'm never going to be successful, because when I'm successful, I'm going to fuck with you. Now, I didn't think that was particularly confrontational. Because I'm Southern Italian, because I'm working class, because working class people will say that. I'm going to fucking kill you. Oh, really? You take it back? Okay. Do you know what I mean? But in the middle class world, that doesn't exist.
But also it's all about truth telling, isn't it? And,
It is.
And ultimately that's what your show's about.
Yes. The parahista.
Yeah. It's about truth telling.
It's about truth telling, yes.
About yourself and about the way you see the world.
Yes, and it's about me and the world. And the thing that's sad for me is that when people write sometimes about my work, as Hilton Alls wrote about me in the New Yorker, a tremendous opportunity for my book and a tremendous opportunity for me, if he would have said what he really thinks about my writing. Instead, he just said, Penny Arcade writes about herself. Well, excuse me, darling. I write about myself in society. If I was just writing about myself, who gives a fuck? But I'm writing about myself in society, so there's that juxtaposition. And then the audience, too, can look at me. If I'm pristinely honest about myself, since we're not that different from one another, we just aren't. We just aren't. That's a reality. Believe me, I have researched this over like 45 years. We're just not that different. We have the same stuff going on. Then the audience, through me, I can give it, like I say, I've had a very sad life. I'm not a sad person. I never was. But I've had a sad life. That's irrefutable. And the way I work it out is, if I give 1 penny of my suffering to everybody in the world, I only have 1 penny instead of 1 million pounds worth. And then the public, with my 1 penny of suffering, which isn't that much and isn't much of a burden, can then kind of look at their own stuff and go, well, you know, because we don't have...
We're all in it together.
We're all in it together, and we do go to the theater to experience that which we are either unwilling or unable to experience in real life. You go to see marvelous, incredible musicals because you would like the whole world to be like that. You'd like getting on like the number 29 bus and the bus driver bursts into song. There's nothing wrong at Trafalgar today. We'll zoom right down Shaftesbury Avenue. You know.
I'm also a gay man. That's why we see the world through musicals. Some of us do.
Well, I say in my show Bad Reputation, which is of course all about humiliation, I say In 1977, when I saw The Village People on television, my first thought was, homosexuals have taken over the world. And then I realized that what gay men do with their humiliation is they invent Broadway. That's an inversion. It's an inversion. Which Quentin Crisp said, a theater goer in my experience is a middle-aged, middle-class woman with a broken heart.
Yeah. And we all have broken hearts.
Yes, absolutely. It's part of the human condition.
Yeah. Can we throw this open to a few questions before we
Sure.
wrap?
This was so much fun. Isn't it totally brilliant? I
A
love
rave
it.
review.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, Larry.
I read somewhere that you're saving the new gay scene in New York. Is that true?
I have a lot of problems with what the new gay scene is because it's very exclusive. It's 2012, and 1970 we thought we had it handled. Oh, in 10 more years, people have blue eyes, people have brown eyes, some people are gay. Who cares? And instead, it's become more and more and more exclusive. And the people who have suffered the most from this, and it's very sad, are heterosexuals who do not judge people on the basis of their sexual orientation. And that's very, very, very troubling to me.
A lot of clubs have become mixed, though, haven't they? Much
A
more,
lot of
much more than ever.
Oh, more than ever, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's lots of gay men who don't want to go to just clone
Yeah.
type places, and that part's great.
Yeah.
But I think it's the it's the queer academic movement that's really problematic, because they want to keep everything very, very small. Or as I like to say, sadly, most academics are like small-time drug dealers. They just deal enough to pay for their own stash. I mean, if you earn money going around the world saying how hard it is being gay,
Yeah.
how much of a hurry are you in for that to change?
Changed, well, quite.
You're not. I want us, to me, gay liberation is human liberation, and that's what it's always been about.
The other thing you've been at we didn't touch on actually, but I think is a big part of the book, of your show, of course, is the burlesque element, the fact that you created a burlesque movement out of that show.
This is Larrabee, who was one of my very, 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 very best dancers, and she married into your fair land. The thing is that when I included erotic dancing in the show, I had done that when I was in my 20s to make money. And I always thought that the downtown art scene was so politically correct. They weren't interested in censorship. They were only interested in censorship regarding funding. Did they care that a 14-year-old girl couldn't go to the library and take out the book, Dear God, It's Me, Margaret, about having her period? They didn't care about that. They only cared about funding. So when I decided to do Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore, after I said the name of it, I said, what the fuck is it? So then I decided that it was going to be about prostitution. It was going to be about all the things that I understood that I didn't think people understood. So I decided to have erotic dancers. So I hired first 2 erotic dancers. The show started with girls. And one of them, Diana Moonmaid, I called her up to ask her if she would do the show, and she had the entire First Amendment on her outgoing answering machine as her message. And I was like, that's my girl. So we did the show, and then 2 years later, I needed to get boys, because I realized I couldn't keep leaving boys out. And there were no boy erotic dancers. The only boy erotic dancers that existed were in small clubs where they would dance for 10 minutes and then have sex with their patrons, And that's why I pressed gay boys I knew into it. And then I hired all these dancers from the South who were really great erotic dancers and could do stuff. They really could do stuff. And someone like, someone like Larrabee, who was a good erotic dancer, well, she learned a lot from Shelley Calcott, who was from the South, who was this amazing pole dancer. But what happened was, we left, Bitch, Dyke, Fag, Hag, Whore, left a neo-burlesque scene all over the world. But the erotica didn't go into it. None of those people learned to do anything. So they just come out and they just do this.
Yeah.
Who cares? Wait till you see my show.
Yeah.
Wait till you see these dancers. These dancers, it's like...
And you've got 15 now. It's gone from 2 to 15.
Well, I mean, in New York, it was 14. we've always had at least 8. I mean, every night there'll be like 8 dancers.
And then there's that great cathartic moment when the audience
Takes over the stage. The thing that's so fascinating is, and we have tons of video, because we video every night of my shows, right? So in the beginning, you'd have an erotic dancer dancing right here with a screen, because we had all these screens. And the audience would be so afraid to look at the erotic dancer that they would be looking at them on video, right above them. You know? So it was quite a phenomenon. But what I've noticed is very little has changed.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's exciting about doing the show, is that it's really relevant, and it's relevant because it's useful. Jack Smith, one of my favorite things Jack said was, "Could art ever be useful?" And I really took that to myself, because I want my work to be useful. And I think that if you go back and you think about Tennessee Williams, or you think about the vegetarian, the famous way back, I can't remember his name right now. I just remember he's vegetarian.
That's not much of a clue.
Shakespeare, okay. Not him, I wasn't saying him, he's not a vegetarian. He was vegan. No, just kidding. But I think most people who write and who do theater do really want it to be useful.
Yeah.
There is an impulse there to show something that people could take away and use for themselves.
And change lives.
Yeah.
Could you see this show being revived, continue to be revived in the next 20 years? I mean,
well, I mean, so far, I mean, you tell me when you see it again, you know. What I know is this. My standard for art is taken from Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt, the great German philosopher, said, the quintessential essence of art is that it is eternal. It has to still have something to say. I think the show does have something to say because it's historical. You know, I mean, and I'm saying past now. For right now, this show, like, everybody should, like, every queer should be forced to see this show so they can stop this bullshit and get forward with being inclusive with everybody, and let's get going.
Yeah.
But whether it could be done in 20 years, I imagine it could be. I've always said that anybody could do it. Someone else could do the show. It doesn't have to be me. It has to be, of course, a charismatic, you know.
Yeah. So Elaine Stritch did an amazing one-man woman show about her life, and I've always thought that it's such a brilliantly scripted piece. John Lahr helped to script it. Somebody else could play that.
Yes, but you know what's so funny? One of my fans bought me a front row ticket to that show.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand why, because I'm still like that kind of East Village.
Yeah.
You know, I've only gone to Broadway, honestly, about 15 times. You know.
Yeah, I'll take you on that.
Oh no, we'll go. No, we'll go a lot now. But listen, the thing that was funny was I saw her show, and here's this woman, this amazing woman.
In her 80s.
In her 80s, who also sung some of the most famous Sondheim stuff.
Yeah.
The originator, and she's talking about how she'd never gotten a Tony.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I'm watching her, and I understood why he sent me, because she's outspoken, she's belligerent, she's a woman, and they don't reward. And I had a Argentinian Reichian doctor, and a few years ago, when I was 51, I said, I'm getting really annoyed. I said, nobody's writing about my work that should be writing about my work. My career isn't where it should be. And he looked at me and he said, Susanna, you have spent your entire career criticizing the mainstream. Now you expect them to reward you. And that's what I understood about Elaine.
Yeah.
Because they do reward you once.
If you play the game.
No, not if you play the game. If enough time goes by, where even the people who were at their most powerful and could have helped you when you were at your most powerful, and then the decline begins, because the decline begins, there's no way around it, then those people are no longer have power. They now become sympathetic to you and realize, like the great scene from The Fountainhead. Do you know The Fountainhead?
Yeah.
The Fountainhead, Ayn Rand's book, see the movie, 1940s movie, brilliant. There's the scene where the great, 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 great architect, based on Frank Lloyd Wright, is standing in front of a building that was his idea, but he did not get the credit for. And standing next to him is the rancid architecture critic who is corrupt and has ruined this man's life. And he stands next to him, and they're both looking at the building. And the little critic goes, I ruined your career even though I knew you were the greatest architect. I must know, what do you think of me? And the architect, looking straight forward, says, I don't. And that, of course, I hate to tell you, that was a huge influence on me 20 years ago. And I said, that's who I am. You know, but I'm a normal person like anybody else. It's very hard not to be liked. It's very hard not to get recognition. All those things are very hard. And I have to balance those between, I took that on. You know, so there you have it.
And there we have it. Thanks everybody for coming today.